Well, thank you everyone for joining us for the latest in the Miller Knoll Insight series online. In case you don't know Miller Knoll are a family of brands, and as an organization, we design and manufacture products for places where people live, where they learn, where they get healed, and also where they work. And today we are going to be looking at the subject of work with two people, Doug Lowrie and Ali Khan. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. As we go along, do feel free to use the chat box for questions, and I will be putting them to them at the end. So, Doug and Ali, you can introduce yourselves. Over to you. The session has started. Thank you.
All
Cool.
right.
Ali, do you want to go first?
Well, I'm
Alphabetical and all.
good morning, everybody. It's fantastic to be here. I'm from about the middle of England, so not as swanky or as tropical as some of the people joining here. But my first question, Doug, who are you? Where are you from?
Hi everyone. I'm Doug Lowrie. I lead a community of workplace practitioners in Sodexo. I am based in the Czech Republic. I'm actually based in a tiny little village of 300 people outside a very big forest, and then on the other side of that is Prague. So basically slap bang in the middle of Europe. I've got an extensive background in workplace strategy. I've spent most of my life in the owner-occupier world in Microsoft, and then I moved over to the supplier world just before the pandemic hit. And working in Sodexo, I've had my eyes opened to a myriad of clients with so many different complex strategies, so many different approaches, and I've learned more in the last 4 years than I've learned in previous, goodness knows how many. So yeah, other than that, I've got a family of 2 children. I'm very happy in the middle of Europe. Ali, what about you?
Fantastic, and thanks, Doug. And just before I introduce myself, I should tell everybody that we're going to take a slightly different approach to a presentational format. We will bring some slides in to make some of the points better visually than we can possibly do verbally. However, what we thought we'd do was have a really good, honest conversation, challenge ourselves and challenge the industry. Where is the industry really at? What does it need? And why on earth are things that we are trying again and again failing, yet we go back and try them again? And we pretend that they're working, which is even worse. So we're going to have an honest conversation about this. In my background, I am not from the same industry as Doug. I come from a very different background. So my background is largely engineering and working in blood diagnostics. So we, the company I was with, we looked after the 120 or so different human disease states, diagnose them and help people not get there in the first place, because that's what you want to try to do. Is prevention is better than cure. And that led me to some of you might know the largest insurance branded company in the world called AXA. So I'm famous over there for a number of top tier flagship products that they have, both in analyzing and diagnosing largely your health state in just a few questions. So we use survey science, precisely the best questions to understand where you're really at. And taking that moving forward, we started to understand how we can better appreciate and measure what the impact of behaviors and conditions that people work in order to get themselves to a place of what we call flourishing. So today, that's why we're talking about people, space, and the link between the two, which is flourishing. So, so Doug, maybe I can, ask you the first question, I guess, which has been burning in my mind for quite some time, ever since we've been working together for nearly 2 years, which is how much has space and the utilization of space evolved? And we know the role of COVID, of course, we don't need to go too much into that. But what are the nuanced kind of things that you've learned that have really stood out, in the last couple of years?
I guess, yeah, I'll just before I get to that question, which is a really good one. I think it's interesting. You're right. We've known each other for 2 years now, and we riff off each other very well. And I think it's due to your introduction about your background and where you come from, about understanding the science behind the human body and the way the human body works to make it most efficient and healthy, etc. And it reminded me of when my friends that I have ask me, "What do you do, Doug?" And I said, "Well, I'm a workplace strategist," or else I'm a space planner, or I'm a designer, or something like that. But there's always a glazed look of confusion on the people's face, because workplace is such a wide, encompassing field. And ultimately, what it boils down to, when I try to explain what I do in the simplest format, I'm a study of human behavior in the office. And I think that's the link. What we as in the world of workplace strategy, what we're trying to do is understand human behavior and then configure the built environment around it to enable that behavior to be most successful, flourish, etc. And I think that's the link between you and I. It's the human behavior element. And it's something that I've been kind of quietly in the background studying through the whole of my career. Whether I started off as a CAD designer and a space planner and project manager and construction expert, all that kind of good stuff. But really, it's around behavioral science. And the interesting things that have happened in the world of design in terms of the real estate strategies, it has been interesting because there's been a handful of leaps in the industry. I remember one of the biggest leaps that I experienced in my time at Microsoft was around about 2008, 2010, when voice over IP came in. So all of a sudden, we were able to untether people from desks because there was no phone there anymore. The phone was built into the mobile device or your laptop, and that was a transition from desktop PCs to laptops as well. So that was a big jump in the workplace strategy world because it enabled free address or non-assigned space, and allowed people to then start looking for spaces that they were able to do their best work in and not be bound to a one-size-fits-all plank of wood, basically. And then we've had a few other jumps since then, but nothing probably as radical as that until the pandemic, because what the pandemic did was accelerate the world of workplace strategy by around about 5 to 10 years in the space of 1 or 2. And it proved to everyone that no one needs to be in the office all the time. They don't need to be in one place to be able to work. So when post-pandemic, people used to say back to work, I used to get very frustrated and say, well, no, you're talking about back to the office. Don't insult these people. They've been working through the pandemic. Right. The activity of work, if you look at the productivity scores of every company, productivity actually increased during that time. Now, there's a question as to what does productivity mean and what are they measuring, and that's work output. So that's if we use the analogy that Neil Usher came up with, alpha and beta work. Alpha work is the task-orientated activities. You know what you need to get done, you know who you need to do it with, and you know when you need to get it done by. Now that's task activity. It's not linked to a physical location, and that actually happened through the pandemic quite happily. And people collaborated virtually and they got stuff done. And that proved from a company perspective that it was possible that people didn't need to be essentially in the office. Beta work, however, which is thought creation, ideation, interaction, collaboration, the innovative stuff, that fell off a cliff. So if you talk to CEOs, what are they most worried about? That's where they're worried about, because that's the future growth and trajectory of a company. And that's actually part of the reason why most companies want their people back into the office, because they believe that face-to-face interaction is where that gets triggered. The way they're going about it in terms of communicating to their staff is really poor, because a lot of other people have got in the way between the CEO's aspiration and the message that gets delivered to the employee about you must return to the office. So the mandating and all that kind of stuff has changed. But so that's the psychological situation we find ourselves in. And then we talk about, well, what are the physical changes that are happening, are the needs that are happening within the physical built environment. Pre-pandemic, most of the stacking and blocking in a building was about 60% of the space was dedicated to focus and concentration space, desks and some phone rooms and stuff. And then 30% was collaboration, whether it's formal meeting spaces or collaborative meeting spaces, open meeting spaces, etc. And then 10% social spaces, the kind of community spaces. If we take the psychological shift that's happened during the pandemic and the way that people have changed, the purpose for coming into the office is not for the alpha work, it's actually for the beta work. And the beta work needs a different physical built environment to enable that to happen. It needs the collaboration, it needs the bumping into people, it needs the more social element. Not to understate the whole mental well-being and mindset, which I'm sure we'll get onto later, about humans are social creatures and they actually require interaction to be in a healthy state of mind. But the tasks of the activities of work, the function in order to create the company money and make them successful and ultimately make their career aspirations successful within that company, those are where people need to come together. I've got a white screen that's come up. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, no, you're still there.
Okay.
Proximity.
I'll ignore that. I can't see anything then. So if you take that, what's actually happening with the physical built environment, and those proportionings are rebalancing, and it's almost a reverse shift. I would say the focus and concentration space, although it's still required, still people. We'll get into the way that people switch tasks much faster than they ever used to. So there still is a requirement for focus and concentration space in our offices, but that requirement has massively reduced, maybe from 60% to 30%, half of it. Okay, because we need much more space on the social. So maybe the social now moves up to 30% rather from 10%. So that triples. And then the collaborative space, both formal and informal, also grows a bit as well to make up the gap. So that's how the proportion, the stacking and blocking is shifting in terms of how we are looking at, if we understand the needs of the employees, the reason why they want to come to the office and the activities they want to do when they come to the office, that's really where the stacking and blocking, the proportioning of the buildings should shift towards. Do they get there? Probably not, because real estate is a it's a profession that has standard kind of massing and blocks and standard equations in terms of how they churn out the buildings that they've always built. If we go to a developer and say we don't want so much of that space, we want a lot more of this space, we want to open your building up, we want to change the floor to ceiling heights, we want to change basically the full-on fabric within the envelope of the building, it's very foreign to them because it's not what they've always done before. But we're slow in that.
So before we go for that, I'm going to challenge ourselves a little bit more here, right? So I'm going to apologize in advance for putting you on the spot, right? So there's more complication involved here, isn't there? Because during COVID, we've had, I wouldn't say a change in the guard of responsibility, but the introduction and the merging of what is classically facilities management. They understand the key metrics. Now we've got HR coming in. Has that simplified or complicated things?
Well, let's be frank. HR, real estate, FM, IT, they've never played nicely in the sandbox together. It's always been tension there. And that tension has been brought to the forefront now. So you're absolutely right. When it comes to, I would say, so if I step back into my Sodexo world as an operator, I'm within an organization within Sodexo called the Global Strategic Account. So I get to support all the accounts that are global in nature, and very large multinational organizations. 50% of them are in the pharmaceutical industry. We've got some tech in there. We've got food and manufacturing companies in there, most of the big ones. And I'm looking at the way that they are engaging now. 90% of them say the top priority now is workplace experience. And it depends on who says it. If it's HR saying it, it's employee experience. If it's FM saying it, it's workplace experience. And that signifies the gap still. Because and I challenged them on it. I said, but hang on, it's not the experience of the workplace, it's the experience that the employees have within the built environment. And you're asking me to curate that experience. I'm curating it not for the workplace, I'm curating it for the people. That I'm going to use the term employee. And I go, no, you can't use that. That's an HR term. You're not allowed to use that. Now, contractually, 9 times out, well, actually, it's now moving to about 7 times out of 10, FM, as in the supplier's FM, so Sodexo is contracted by FM or real estate organization, which typically reports to finance. Okay. And therefore, that's where you see the gap. It's workplace because it's an asset. It's a financial asset. That's the mindset that comes in. Whereas now, here's the interesting thing: through the pandemic, a few of our GSA clients switched, and FM now reports into HR. And those clients are accelerating much faster about the holistic employee experience. And they're using the term employee experience, and the engagement they have back to the employees becomes a person-to-person dialogue between the environment that we're curating for the people when they come to the office and the people themselves. Whereas the other cohort, let's say, are still tied up sometimes. And this is not all, I'm generalizing massively here, but they're still tied up in that piece that we don't own the relationship between the company and the employee. Okay? We facilitate it. We don't own it. Whereas now the companies that are now aligned back into HR, now it's a combined ownership over the health and well-being and the experience of the entire of the employee. And that's where it gets more interesting, because then it accelerates the minds, the great ideas on both parties coming together. It's far stronger, and also it takes on board the care of responsibility outside of the office as well.
Gotcha. Okay. So I think we should tell the world a little bit about where we intersect with each other. And so that's really, you've set the scene wonderfully well, I think. And I think I've got a few more challenging questions to really bring out the real issues that are kind of underlying here that we don't tend to hear too much about. So we'll get onto those. Should I tell a little bit about what we've been up to together, perhaps, and a little bit behind the scenes in terms of, what the science that we have discovered along the way?
I think that'd be great.
All right, fantastic. Well, let me do this. So Mark has make sure that the PowerPoint was working. So I'm going to share this and see if this comes up. And Doug, if you just give me the nod and tell me that you can see the screen.
Do you want to put it on full screen?
I can. That's wonderful. There we go.
There you go.
Okay.
Lovely.
The 3 best logos you'll see this morning, or wherever you are in the world at the end of the day. Okay, so Shape, and I'm the CEO of Shape. We started the company about 7 years ago, and the first 3.5 to 4 years was just spent working out what do we need to look at beyond the realm of health and well-being to truly understand what affects a person's performance and their productivity. They're 2 different things. We won't get into that too much right now. But fundamentally, what is it that, from an insurer's perspective, who are largely looking at life or health or well-being, what do they need to understand more that they can provide to their particular client? So that was my original thinking. And together with my partner, Dr. John Lang, who's out in Sydney, Australia, again, both backgrounded in medical science, we tried to bring that view of the world into a myriad of different areas that really we didn't know at the time that when we were doing the research, would actually have such an impact on some of the work that Doug, you and the team are doing over at Sodexo. And the reason was simply because we went right back to the heart of what you said, Doug, which is who are we serving? We're fundamentally serving the employee. And therefore, let's ask the employee. And what we realized very quickly was everybody's doing it wrong. HR especially. They're responsible, quite frankly, squarely, for collecting information that is intelligence that supports the strategy of what an organization is experiencing. And an organization here means the mass of people, the population of employees. And what should they do next? So essentially what we got to was understanding what are the questions that we need to ask. And the questions fundamentally represent the highest impactors that are going to affect people from their behavior and their conditions around them. So what they do and they don't control. And we created a series of models, and ultimately it turned into an index. And what we realized was ultimately everybody just needs to flourish. So that raises the question, what is flourishing? And so flourishing means people, in our definition, it's a definition of, by the way, flourishing at work. So flourishing means people reaching their full potential through the conditions that enable optimal performance, fulfillment, and growth. And what we've learned is actually we might be the first in the world to put a formal definition to flourishing at work, because it actually doesn't really exist. Flourishing in life exists, and there's plenty of models in the literature and the journals out there. But what does flourishing at work really mean? So there are two ways to think about this to make it really simple for everybody. If you've got a certain condition, let's say it's your temperature, you can flourish in that temperature to a peak point, and we can measure that. But like Doug, you said about the beta actions, they're harder to measure because they're intangible. So we've cracked that as well. We know how to measure those too. And the critical piece here is all of this is to help the individual understand where they need to pay attention for themselves, but also inform the HR and the FM and the IT and the management team and elsewhere about what they need to do to fill in the gaps. And we call those the deficit, the flourishing deficit. So very quickly, if I just walk you through what we've done from a research perspective, what we found, there were 12 areas in total. And so we call these the explorers. And within each of these explorer topics, you have a series of drivers that are collected through a series of questions. And those questions follow the survey science and best-in-class approach to measuring with high degree of accuracy, where is the psychological health of that person, their physical health, their job satisfaction. And then we get into the employee's commitment, their engagement, and their dynamic with their co-workers, because that affects their ability to perform. What about the relationship they have with the manager and the style of management they receive? And then you can't complete the picture without corporate culture. There are a series of essentials such as shared values, systems, salaries. These are fundamental to every business, no matter where you happen to be. So we collect and measure those 10 key factors. And then, of course, we've got the soft and the physical work environment. And then we've got the factors outside of work. So we also call this life outside of work as well, because it affects your ability to be able to operate effectively inside of work. And so if you are scoring the highest possible place you can, we categorize them as flourishing, striving, and struggling to make it really easy for people to understand, are they thriving, are they flourishing in that particular condition or that behavior? So far, so good, Doug. Is that all making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a couple of questions. So Ali, this is awesome, because what it's doing is mapping out the entire the architecture of all the things that influence a person, and their whether their health, whether their feeling, whether their anxiety, whether their connection to the company, whether their career aspirations, all of those great things. But essentially, it's a survey. So, Ali, can you talk a little bit more about how do you get over the fact that yet it's another survey? Because I hit that barrier a lot with our clients. They go, well, no, our employees have been surveyed to death. We've got massive survey fatigue in the company. I don't want another survey. How does this differ from a standard normal HR survey or an FM survey or those kind of surveys?
Doug, it's like everything actually. When you get into the detail, what you find is that actually people aren't fed up with surveys. What they're fed up with is ask me questions and then tell me nothing, and then speak to me after months and tell me your interpretation of what you want me to know in order to influence me to do something that I don't believe and it's out of date. We live in the world and an age of tweets, if we can call it that. And we can also look at it from a perspective of living in the now. That's what TikTok's done to all of us. We've got an attention span of 8 seconds, and that's why we have to flip between different things. We don't expect our customers to put up with, we'll ask you a question, we'll give you nothing in return. So why on earth do we expect that to do that to our employees? So employees want a high quality, interactive, two-way communication. They don't mind that. And I really like your point, yet another survey. Well, what we've done is, if we think about it, we've actually brought all the data points together with the best of empirical science, statistical science, social science, behavioral science, clinical science, series of sciences that we brought into play that help you get an understanding of where everybody's at with regards to what everybody would need to know to make the right decisions for their own departments. So it's not another survey, it's the survey, period. And so what we've done to fix that, the very first person to get feedback instantly after asking the questions, answering the questions, is they themselves get their own personal confidential report, GDPR compliant, wherever you are in the world, not just this part of the pond. And what that does, it gives the employee confidence that A, they're about to be heard, and they get the feedback they're looking for in terms of where are they at right now. And so that goes some way. There's other explanations to this to help the community of users and the departments get what they need, because just as one example, if you look at the best of the best examples out there, Amazon, Facebook, etc., what they did was they centralized information. And what I mean by that is, yes, we've got a lot of people tell me when I go and speak to companies, they'll say, yeah, but we've got FM doing this, and we've got occupational health, and we've got EAP, and we've got well-being. Yes, but what you've got is certain providers who come in, provide the services, but they take the data away. So the intelligence is disparate. And if you can't centralize, you can't get a holistic view. So yes, you're doing it, but you're doing it wrong. And I'm happy to call that out now, because there's another big discovery that we made along the way, that almost everybody in the world is doing it wrong when it comes to survey science as well. So that's why, quite frankly, if I was an employee in a large corporate company answering these questions, and I have been, I wouldn't believe it either.
No, I asked the question because so I've now been in the operator world for the last four years, and I look at the surveys that we typically send out for CSAT and OSAT and all this, and I look at the surveys that drive the KPIs for FM, and they're still very service line orientated. Are the toilets clean? Are you happy with the staff cleaning the toilets? Those kind of things. And I get confused because I'm trying to study human behavior, and it's like, no, that's a trigger for a KPI metric for cleanliness to satisfy a contract. Yet it does nothing for me to understand is the overall, or is the experience the employees are having good or not. And what I liked about Shape, and this is probably why our relationship has flourished, to use the word again, it is you're getting into the pure emotion of an employee. You're getting in, you're able to get those measures around experience. And so when I look at, as an operator, if I'm there, if the primary function of the operator really is to curate the experience, then we need new KPIs. We don't want those service-led KPIs. I mean, yes, we've been cleaning toilets for tens of years. So we know how to do that. That's good. We've got it. Now let's talk about where the value is for your company and the value for your most expensive asset is your people. Therefore, why don't we start focusing on that experience and trying to make that experience so good that they want to come to the place, they get what they need out of it, they get their career progression, they get their health, they get their everything. Let's focus at that. And this is why this scientific method of actually targeting the source, which is the people, to understand their psyche, and the work that we've been doing recently is around developing the Workplace Experience Index, which is not yet another survey. It's actually cherry picking all the elements within this dial of explorers that actually will help an operator like Sodexo to understand where there are things that have a direct correlation. So whether it's the temperature levels or the comfort levels and things like that, or the compression levels of have we got too much space, have we got too little space, is it too quiet, is it too noisy? 9 times out of 10 when people say I'm distracted, it's actually not because it's too noisy, it's because it's too quiet. And therefore there's no background noise, in which case you'll hear a pin drop or you'll hear that conversation that your colleague's taking at the other end of the floor, because there's nothing to stop that. There's no background noise anymore. So it's those levels that come into the way we should be measuring. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said the key is the first person to receive the report should be the respondee of the survey. Because then you create the value. That means they'll come back. That means they'll welcome a quick pulse survey a month down the line to say, how are you getting on with this one? How are you getting on with that one? You build a relationship with that person, and it becomes their personal health assistant.
Well, Doug, can I show you a couple?
We get a constant monitoring of, okay, we've made this change. Did it have an impact? Yes or no? It did. Great. Keep doing it. Invest more in it. Grow it. It didn't have an impact? Okay, stop doing it. Fail fast. Yeah, that's how what we need in the industry to really accelerate now, because we are in this world where the expectation of the employee is so much different than what it was pre-pandemic, and that social contract between employee and employer has shifted. The employee has the power. They know that they can go elsewhere. They know that they can do something else. They know that they can actually, their voice should be heard more. And an organization who doesn't listen to their employees is not going to do well in this world where everything is on show.
The word, Doug, I got excited about the word when you said impact. I want to actually show a twist in the tail here about how the science flows and why I made such a, big statement that organizations are doing it wrong. And let me just give you this handful of different insights to dig deeper. So if we take facilities, just a handful of the things we're looking at are the classic elements, but they're very cleverly worded in the questions. And we call these alpha questions. They are the best possible way in the journals and the literature to collect information that helps us understand the impact of those conditions or those behaviors on the person experiencing them. Lighting, temperature, etc., as you can see here. I want to show you some, we pulled this data off actually just a couple of hours ago. And what we can do is we can quantify where this is for a person, a team, and a company level. That helps businesses make the right decisions because they understand not just where things are at, but in the lens of flourishing, you can start to understand where do you need to go next. So here are companies in our pool of quite a few companies who have completed the survey. And what we found was companies with good temperature flourish 30% more than those without it. So we know lighting works, but for the first time we can talk about just how much. So if you want people to flourish overall, it means investing in good temperature will actually make a difference. We can also do the same for good lighting. It has an impact. These things genuinely have an impact on a person. And they are marginal, they're tiny per person, but collectively they add up. And then you've got the workplace quality. And just one more, we've also got tidiness. So these very mundane things that we think don't really matter and they're just tick box exercises, we've turned them into something quite serious that helps strategy form and do it confidently.
I think this is fascinating because now we're getting into measures that an operator can actually have a dialogue with their contracting partner, FM, real estate, whoever it is, and actually talk about, right, this is how we're contributing to your employees flourishing. Okay,
Yeah.
and what will be interesting here is that what you'll see is there will be a difference from site to site, geographic region by geographic region. So and I've hit this before with the temperature one, because when we were looking at how do we build a measurement platform using IoT data and smart building data, we were looking at the building management systems and the temperature sensors and stuff like that. And then I said, well, what does good look like for temperature? What should it be? So I went into the well standards of what a good temperature setting should be. Okay, and it said, I'm like 22 or range between 21 to 23 or whatever that is. And I was like, interesting. That's never going to work in Dubai. You're never going to get down that cold. It's accepted the general temperature in Dubai is around about 25. So that's over your well standard. Well, hang on a minute. Is that right? Or is it wrong? And how much energy you're going to burn trying to cool the buildings down to that level. So really what you've got here is you've got the science behind what is actually working for employees and what's not working for employees. So therefore you can actually tune and tailor the right curated experience within the right geographies around the world. Okay, so similarly, if you're looking in the Nordics where there's something where the temperature outside is much colder typically, it may be acceptable to be at 21 or 20. That might still be fine. Yeah, or you put a jumper on or something like that. I don't know, but you know, getting this variability, but driven from the people, not from an industry standard or a real estate standard or a textbook standard from what the building was designed to do because it's the standard developer's execution. So I think this is super fascinating because this allows us to be far more surgical in the way that we curate the experience.
Doug, we've just had a question I saw pop up, and it's asking a good question about what is effectively the right temperature. The right temperature actually is irrelevant from the macro perspective if the person isn't flourishing within it. So you move the frame, that's the point. And just very quickly, I just want to show one or two more slides because it really gets the point across. What we found is what organizations, 99% of organizations are falling for the same trick. What's happened is they run a survey. I'm not even going to talk about how good or bad the questions are and how poor a lot of them happen to be. But let's just say they asked the employees the questions. The first thing is they don't even provide the employees with a personal view. But let's say they do.
Or
let's
even
say
the overall view
very
sometimes, which is also annoying.
Yeah, true. But let's say they do. Let's say they give the employees feedback. What they're really doing is they're only going as far as look at your weakest scores and address them. And that's where they stop. 99% of companies stop there and employees go away and they work on them. What we found were the two critical things that were missing. Number one, purpose. When you make purpose a North Star, so you've got a clarity around this is our brand, this is our mission, this is our vision. Well, you can do exactly the same thing here. You can say our purpose is going to be to drive resilience in this business because there's a big wave that's going to be attacking us, from economic conditions. Or it could be we want to improve the mental health of the organization. That's a purpose. We then trained the data and the answers to look at it from that lens, that perspective. And guess what we found? The weakest scores were actually ineffective to impact in an optimal way to that North Star. And so we picked flourishing as the baseline, and we are innovating paths to other purposes. And when you do that, what you find is that you can actually make these conditions in the workplace part of the top tier stack of things that are genuinely going to help a person. And that, if you can do it at employee, at team, and company level, you're starting to really change the game. Now, I think we're nearly up on the 45-minute mark, so I'm going to stop sharing. And I think there's been a good flurry of questions coming in as well.
I think just one more thing to add on that last point you made, and on the way you're looking at the health or of the organization.
Mhm.
What it says to me is that that is something where HR particularly should be really focusing on, because whoever, or well, I say HR because I'm generalizing. I'm presuming HR is taking care of the employee's well-being at that in the company, but the employee assistance programs
Mhm.
is an area that does frustrate me, because it's very generalist. And we know why, because it comes off traditional surveys. Okay, and it treats, and it's aggregated as everyone, the aggregator score is this, that's where we want to put the employee assistance program in. The reality that you've got in this mechanism, you can target it by group.
Mm.
And some groups may be a burning platform in one topic, but the same topic for another group may be absolutely fine.
Mm.
Right? So what you've got is you've got a typical employee assistance program budget of say $2,000 per head. What you want to do is say, right, actually those organizations over there are burning platforms. Let's load them up with $4,000 a head. And
Mm.
those ones are doing really well. They're flourishing. They're doing. Leave them alone.
Yeah.
Drop their budget down to $200 a head.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can actually start to organizational behavioral management of your entire company
Mhm.
and target where support is needed.
And Doug, we've
But
done that. We've actually demonstrated just by, looking at the data from that perspective, you can actually augment your strategy entirely. You're seeing new things for the first time that wouldn't have actually, have been in the domain of responsibility or even appearance. If you can't see it, then you don't need to worry about it. So we've got a couple
we've got
couple of good
questions.
questions here. I'm wondering, Mark, do you want to come back in and harass us both with answering properly and honestly, or
Yeah, I'm the practical question. I know you mentioned Klaus one, what is a good temperature, but you did ask the one which is often a very sensitive question. How do you manage the different temperature experience of women and men? Is there a practical guide that you've seen, Doug, to doing that? Is there a protocol around that?
I haven't, and it is something that does come up, and I do hear it regularly. Hold on one second. I've just got to get my dog to be quiet. 1 second.
while Doug's doing that, I'll jump in very quickly. So Doug and I have these fascinating conversations about um, uh, just everything in life generally. Sometimes when we get off, talking about things, but there was one conversation that we had was fantastic, which was you can really personalize food, which is Sodexo's core business. Heck, you can even put more masala on it if you wish, to really make it fantastically personalized to your own taste. But temperature is just one of those things amongst a whole bunch of others, where when you walk into that place, there is going to need to be a compromise. You are compromising. So actually what we're pioneering behind the scenes is something called the compromise score.
Mm.
And that we think may lead to innovation because at the moment, Mark, I think the truth is who compromises most? Is it the management team that needs to compromise more or not, etc.? They're doing, hierarchically more powerful and important work than the guys at the shop floor. So it's a big debate, but I think we can contribute to that in a big way, through the measurement.
I think one other thing which we can add is we've got a lot more flexibility or freedom than we used to have in terms of designers, in terms of designing spaces to be more ambiently quiet, or and those spaces, the quiet spaces, because they're more sedentary, maybe bump the temperature up a little bit. And those spaces are more active, that are more brightly colored, and maybe the increased lighting level is areas where you can potentially drop the temperature down a little bit because there's more human activity in the space. So I think there is, when you've got the science, you can start to play with the dials and play with the levers to say, okay, actually what we're going to do is create a plethora of environments. And we've been talking about activity-based working for years. Herman Miller coined it. So we need to look at activity-based environments as well, and start thinking of the holistic experience and having variation in those experiences. Don't just do one size fits all across your entire physical built environment. We need to think about different areas as well. Now, that's not to say it's going to fix the solution, because you may have a male and a female working together in close proximity in a team, and therefore you're always going to get that conflict. The question really comes back to, if we understand the science and we understand where their comfort factor really is, what's the halfway medium between the two? And that's the target for that particular building, for that particular space. If you're able to then look at the science by team, and you know geographically which neighborhood teams typically gravitate towards, then you can start to get even more clever about how you actually pull those levers in each of the spaces. Now, this is obviously, sometimes people might say you're high in the sky thinking, but that is where the trajectory of smart buildings are going. Okay, so a lot of the stuff that I'm looking at in terms of Sodexo and how we manage data, how we actually think about this digital landscape, and we get this information. Can I cross compare the IoT and the signals from the physical built environment with the performance scores of experience and flourishing, and start to target those and use the machine learning between the two to say, okay, if I was allowed to say, take that one data set, merge it with the other, which compromises should be done where based on that information crossover? Those are information data sets we've never really successfully cross-pollinated before. That's where we're hugely excited about in terms of how we can leverage AI to start looking at those data models in the future.
Great, thank you. I have put a link which is to Kate Asher, and Kate Asher is a special menopause coach as well, and I think she covers a lot of those issues and has done some great talks for us. Damien asked, in my experience, HR rarely see themselves as responsible for people experience, and this is a bit controversial. They're merely a hire and fire function. In my workplace projects, I recommend this is brought back under HR or hired in and rebranded workplace experience lead. And that binds HR, FM, and IT. I'd be interested to hear other suggestions to ensure that a function leads this.
I remember catching myself, because I made a comment once, this was many years ago, saying there's nothing human in HR anymore, because it was very much around, it's just their business operations support. Okay, so supporting different departments on their talent and attraction model of hiring and firing effectively. The reality is that there is so much focus now on employee experience post-pandemic. Every company in the world is struggling with the fact that they've got all these massive assets that are empty or gradually coming back, depending on where you are in the world. It's fascinating. I mean, we've got a few attendees from Asia, and it's really interesting to see what's happening over there. And actually, in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be over in Asia and at Cornet and things like that. And my primary objective is just to understand more. I mean, I've worked in global roles for the last 15 years, but I haven't spent time in Asia. Yet there does seem to be a very different response to return to the office in that region. And I want to understand why. Is it the culture? Is it the socio-demographics of the countries? What is it and why is it? And then we see that, well, okay, it's no longer a problem there, but actually no, that just masks the old problems are still going to persist in Asia. Whereas on the Western Hemisphere, we're starting to see a lot more people not coming back because people moved out of the cities. And then we're looking at, okay, the distances between where they now live and the office, how much does that play in their decision when and whether to come into the office or not? And I've always had a very interesting look at it to say, well, I've worked virtually for many years, so I can handle it. But I remember when I first started, it took a lot of behavior changing for me to understand how to work remotely. I've got off topic, apologies. But to come back to the HR piece, there is fundamentally a need for that workplace experience lead or behavior officer or the CXO, the chief experience officer in companies now, because that's what it's about. Employees are the greatest asset in any company. how you care for them marks the capabilities and the reputation of the company itself. Therefore, it's critical that that happens. And you're right, it is a combination of HR, IT, FM, real estate. All of those functions together need to pull together. And it's the age-old problem. I think we've got the impetus to actually do it now.
Great, thank you. Maria asks, and maybe this is one for you, Ali, how do you measure intangibles?
I'm going to link it to the previous question as well here, Mark. I think HR, like everything, is multi-layered and complex. I think that's one function of HR, which is administrative, but there's the HR strategy, and actually, HR, human. There's actually something which is human capital. We are trained as organizations to focus primarily on financial. Even from a human perspective, we've actually capitulated a lot to what is the financial gain. And we've got ROI models. It's not just about collecting data, it's turning that data into something far, far more valuable. And you can't do that with just taking what you can see. You have to go beyond and try to quantify that. So the way you do that in terms of science is you look at the literature, and the literature will tell you a lot. I'll give you an example. The last thing you ask somebody, if you want to know if they're stressed, anxious or depressed, which is fundamentally the three tenets of mental health, is, Mark, are you depressed today? You don't do that, right? You don't ask a person, are you stressed? What you do instead is you say, having trouble sleeping recently? Are you winding down pretty well after work? And so you look for the conditions that lead to, and that's why the literature helps. So what we've done is we've gone back to the literature to look at the links between the conditions and the behaviors. And here's an interesting stat for you. A lot of what organizations are doing strategically is pushing the responsibility back onto individuals and saying, you must do this. Yeah, I can tell you from any statistic we look at, it's less than 30%, which is in the control domain of the individual. 70% of what that individual is going to succeed at is in your managers and the executive leadership's hands. So they've got to start to understand where they play a role. And if they make a policy, which is the silliest thing in the world, it doesn't matter what the individual is going to do because the bureaucracy is going to stop them in the first place. So that's what we've got to get honest about. And when you can ask those questions, you can measure it, you can come back with a stratified view. And then remember that last piece, which is the impact switch. How can you tell that story from a perspective of beyond just the mundane high scores, low scores, focus on the low scores only? Oh, Mark, you're not mute, are you?
Sorry, I was coughing. Yeah. Magdalena raises a couple of issues. I think that what makes Flourishing better is the first 5 topics, but it's also important to have right temperature chairs, etc. But Flourishing mostly depends on relationships between people and managers. And in my opinion, it's more important when we have workers from different generations whose ways of working and expectations are different. Now, I'm going to ask you the question, is that true or is that a generalization? And I'm going to also add Magdalena's other point is you do all these surveys with individuals, groups, and you come up with a general solution, but does that actually satisfy individuals, if you know what I mean? That it's an overall solution, but you might not get individuals hit everyone.
Doug, if you want me to just very, very quickly just give a quick answer to that from Mike, I'll hand over to you because
if you answer the first part, I'll answer the second part.
Well, look, the answer to the first part is really simple. The answer is absolutely, absolutely, absolutely yes. It's entirely true. I just put the name down there for some other work I've been doing with AXA, which is the Mind Health Index work. If you go there, you'll find the white papers on their website, and you'll be able to download statistics of precisely what happens when you can actually acquire the skills. And interestingly, just on skills acquisition, the older you get, the better you get at certain things. Call it wisdom. And the younger you are, you're not trained enough to deal and react accordingly with certain stimuli. What we found was when the younger people actually go and acquire the skills such as EQ, self-acceptance, etc., they actually start to perform nearly as well in their mental health as a person who's older than them. So yes, you can do it. And actually we can quantify that. Now, the reason I say Mind Health Index, by the way, is because that work is far, far further ahead than what we're doing on SHAPE. But it's the same science base that we're using there. So we will be producing statistics precisely with regards to what is that interplay between different age groups, different demographics from gender perspective and so forth.
And I'll probably add to the reverse is probably also true, where the age and the wisdom comes in, but the younger generation challenging and asking those complex questions with their experiences helps to sometimes untie the biases that the age-old wisdom has of fixed bias, so that the combination is always stronger rather than having individually. On the other part of the question around the aggregation of the survey information and then being activated and actioned upon at an organizational level, an employee, let's be frank, an employee never sees it. Okay, it's something that happens invisibly in the background. It might be in the ivory tower, they've had a boardroom discussion about the direction of the company. Maybe this information has contributed to that direction. They may or may not know. The key thing about SHAPE, and I'm going to give my personal experience of SHAPE because I've had the privilege of taking the survey a couple of years ago now, actually, about 2 years ago now. It was an old generation of it's advanced a lot more now. But and this is why I'm so passionate about this partnership that we have. The report that you get after hitting the submit button, and I'm dyslexic, so I read every single line, so it did take me around about 35-40 minutes. I think a normal person might only take about 25 minutes, but it was hugely valuable, and I would absolutely do it again because of the quality of the report I got back. It looked at all aspects of my life. It measured everything, and then it gave tangible, actionable advice on each element. Okay, so for example, and I'll share with you one of the low scoring pieces was psychological, and it was around the advice given is saying, look, the amount of coffee you're drinking is high. Consider cutting it down. Okay, and I did. So I now have one very good cup of coffee in the morning. I was drinking about 6 or 7, and it has made a difference to my attention span in meetings and my urge to jump in and correct or course correct or add my perspective, sometimes unwanted. and now I'm far more relaxed and far more able just to listen to the conversation, contribute where required, whether voluntary or requested. But it has made a tangible impact, and I have taken a step back and reflected and said, yeah, that did actually make a difference. A very small actionable thing, not rocket science at all, made complete sense, and it has tangibly had an impact on my ability to work and flourish going forward. There's been a few others as well. I won't go into, they're a little bit too personal, but I was shocked at how accurate it was, and it called out some things which I hadn't even realized myself. So that's why I'm passionate about this, because it is backed by science, and it's the first survey I've actually seen that actually does understand the human psyche, rather than, are you happy with the cleanliness of the toilets?
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. We've reached our time, and the dog in your office has created a bit of debate. So, in fact, I met a dog last night at an event that I've heard more times on camera and seen on camera, but I actually met it in person for the first time. That's quite exciting. Excellent. That's kind of weird. So, but
we all love pets.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And everyone, as you leave, you will be taken to a feedback form. If you could give us information and feedback, that will be useful. This session is happening again later today. If you want to recommend it to any colleagues, just let us know. I put a link into future events, and there will be a follow-up email where we'll give the contact details for Ali and Doug and the slide deck that was shared today. Ali and Doug, I've really enjoyed the conversation. Looking forward to it again later today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. and your applause comes in the form of little comments in the chat box now. So thank you, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well.